you are just as valuable as any other member of your family.
You are listening to the Alzheimer's Podcast with Mike Good of Togetherness, your number one resource for practical tips and insights, empowering you and your family to live well with Alzheimer's. Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Alzheimer's Podcast. I'm Mike Good of Togetherness. Thank you for joining me for another podcast where my goal is always to empower you to maintain a positive experience, reduce and eliminate the need for medications, and make your time together with those you care for the best it can be. Today continues our series, Navigating Rough Terrain with the Dementia Sherpa. In case you're new, Christy Turner, the Dementia Sherpa, joins me every other Tuesday for a discussion to help empower you to be successful as you care for someone living with dementia. She is a Certified Dementia Practitioner, Certified Dementia Care Unit Manager, and Cognitive Stimulation Instructor. She has run award-winning memory care communities in assisted living and skilled nursing levels of care. Using her 16 years of experience in working with over 1,100 people living with dementia and their families, she's developed a system that helps families move from crisis management to confidence. In today's episode, Christy and I discuss family dynamics around the holidays. Hello, Christy. It's great to have you back.
Great to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. You know, Christy, I can't even imagine how difficult the holidays must be for the primary care partner of someone with Alzheimer's or another dementia. And, you know, for many families, the holidays are the only time of year the extended family comes together in one location. And depending on the size of the family, the different personalities, and where the loved one is in the disease process, I can only imagine the challenging dynamics this might create. But it is one that you've covered well in your holiday guide, Successfully Navigating the Holidays.
Well, thank you. Really the only thing I can think that would make a bad situation worse would be if you did some holiday shopping before squishing together family that doesn't get along together all in one place and add a person who's living with dementia on top of it. As I say in the guide, in Successfully Navigating the Holidays, I tell a story that in my family is still known as the Thanksgiving Massacre. And so I won't delve into that because it's there in Successfully Navigating the Holidays. But it is absolutely true that a bad situation does not magically get better because of a holiday. And I think that's one thing that often we like to have the fantasy. We all do, right? Mm-hmm. And so those Norman Rockwell paintings are just so darn cute. And wouldn't it be great to have a holiday just like that? And yes, it would. And I think for the majority of people out there, I could be wrong, but I think for the majority of people out there, it's just, that's not how it is, period. So that's one thing that's really important to recognize. And I think we do subconsciously, we're just thinking, I just need this to be special. I just need to have this one day, or this one meal or whatever to all be okay. And I can appreciate the need for that. But I also try and just be so upfront with the clients, that I work with. This is not going to magically happen. And in fact, even if you have a great family, it's not going to magically come together without a hitch, this holiday meal. You're going to still have to do some advanced planning. So when we're talking about some ugly family dynamics, there are definitely some things that you can do to make sure you have the best experience possible.
Yeah, I did read your article entitled Massacre. I'll shorten it, and it had elements that I remember experiencing at some of my family gatherings. So, unfortunately, those elements or whatever we want to call situations must not be that uncommon. So
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. They're just all too common,
yeah.
is the thing. So I think just here are some tips to, or some things to know, and some tips to try and mitigate what could be disaster.
Okay.
So number one, just your mindset. Know that even if you went to therapy 15, 25 years ago and feel like you got a handle on all of the family crap that you grew up with, it comes back around as you are caring for your parent who's living with dementia. It just does. It bubbles right back up to the surface. And this is one of the things that my clients are always most surprised about. Wow, I didn't see that coming. I didn't know that was going to happen. And yet it does. So that's really important to know. Another thing is that it could be, if it's your parent who's living with dementia, right? They may have been to therapy for things that happened in their life, in their childhood, in their, earlier adulthood, and lived a great life. But the benefits of that therapy will be eroding over time, right? As people are forced through their condition to move backward in time and lose the ability to use reason and logic. And those therapy memories, the information that was gleaned from that, that might not be accessible to them anymore. And they're more focused on what was happening in their childhood or teen years. So just know that all of that can happen. And I think knowing it can happen is really helpful, instead of feeling like you were, just knocked upside the head with a 2x4
Right.
out of nowhere, right?
Right.
So that's really important. The other thing to remember, and I mean this with all my heart, alcohol makes everything worse. And I think that we joke a lot about how, we can use alcohol to kind of grease the skids and make everything better. You get a room full of people who have tenuous relationships at best, or where there's somebody who maybe has used alcohol heavily throughout the years, or when you're telling stories about family gatherings from your childhood.
Right.
And there's always an element of, and then so-and-so got drunk, or then so-and-so passed out. Understand there's a pattern there, and it's related to alcohol.
Right.
So the other thing that having a strict no alcohol policy does is, for the people who really do have to drink and that's how they cope, they're not going to stick around that long.
True.
Right. So they're going to eat, and then they're going to take off. So you've avoided that disaster. Another thing is set expectations. Do that first. Do that if you're like, I don't know, I don't think I really need this Navigating the Holidays guide because I'm listening to the podcast. First of all, I encourage you to definitely continue listening to the podcast. But second of all, also download this. It's free. The reason being, if for no other reason, there is an email template in there that you can use with out-of-town family, and heck, you can use it with in-town family. But what it does is help set expectations. So if you have other family that is invited for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever, and they're not usually around, this sets expectations for them. And I give you the template to use, and also explain in the example why you want to word things a certain way, and the rationale behind that. And so what it does is it puts you out front as setting those expectations. This is how it is now. And the other thing is, you don't even have to have weird family dynamics to use this.
Right,
Maybe it's just people who haven't seen your spouse or your parent in a long time, and this is just preparing them for what they're walking into, which, think of that as just being kind, right? So it tells people kind of where your person is right now in the disease process, what works and what doesn't work, acknowledges that they probably have certain expectations, or that you understand, of course, how much they loved XYZ tradition, and this is how it needs to be now because, and then you bring it right back around to your loved one. It needs to be the way I'm outlining it's going to be because this is what works best for mom or dad or whoever it is.
Those templates, the template and the scripts you have in there are so incredibly well done. I highly recommend to anybody listening to this podcast to download that guide, share it with people, and help empower other people to understand this, what's going on. And I thank you, Christy, for putting those together because it's just such an incredible resource.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I'm glad that you brought up, yes, there are scripts in there too, and because when I'm writing, I am always trying to put myself in somebody else's shoes, right? Mm-hmm. And one of my problems is when I don't see a problem coming or I don't see what's around the corner, my reaction is to kind of freeze. I call it standing there and drooling. Huh? What? What do I do now? And so these scripts address a lot of situations where that might be your normal reaction. The other thing is when you use those scripts, and I do recommend that you use them with somebody that you trust, a good friend, or if there's somebody in your family you can trust, practice with each other. And that's called behavioral rehearsal. And what that does is if you are faced with that situation or a similar situation, your mind jumps to that rehearsal. You've been through this before. Your brain has a frame of reference.
Wow.
Okay. And it's a more recent frame of reference on how to handle this versus what was maybe embedded into your brain from 15 years when you were a kid and it always happened a certain way. Now you have an alternative way to handle it.
That's great advice. That's kind of like how with the travel podcast you talked about doing a dry run. Now we're doing a dry run in a different way,
exactly,
but a very important way that I can see how that would be so beneficial. You just have to be proactive to do that.
Yeah, absolutely you do. And you know what? If you're like, well, gosh, it's just me and then my idiot brother who's coming from out of town and this can be bad. That's okay. Practice with your cat. Practice with your dog. Practice with the dining room table. Whatever it is, just get yourself in the space where you are able to easily recall there's a different way to do this. I'm not saying you have to memorize it, but, run through each scenario a few times. Take the time to do that. Saying it out loud helps, for whatever reason, burn it in your brain because your brain has now been through the process of actually saying these words out loud. Again, you have a more easily accessible frame of reference for handling it different. So that's important. Another thing to remember is you don't have to have it at your house, right? If you're the primary care partner, it's really, you're doing a big job and you don't have to do certain things just because so-and-so always did it a certain way, or because your jerk of a sister-in-law has certain expectations, or whatever the case may be. You don't have to. So repeat after me. So-and-so is not the boss of me. Okay? So just take a moment and say that. So-and-so is not the boss of me. But don't say so-and-so. Put in that person's name. And you should be feeling right now, even after saying that out loud a couple of times, like, yeah, that's right. She's not the boss of me. So you can do things differently. Your job in, providing that day-to-day care, number one in that is always safety, right? And so having a bunch of cranky people in your home, people who are bringing bad juju, people who are not able to respectfully interact with one another, you don't need that kind of negativity in your life.
Right.
And more important, your loved one does not need that kind of negativity in the air. Remember, emotions are contagious. And this is why you love hanging out with your best friend, because you love how you feel. This is also why you don't want a bunch of jerks in your house, You're not going to love the way it feels. And neither is your person who's living with dementia. And they're going to pick up on that real quick. It's not going to be a good experience. So you don't have to have people to your house. You can say that you made other plans. You can go to someone else's house, right? And maybe it's still within your family and you're going to their house. And the beauty of that, although, yeah, it could be more difficult to get ready and get out the door. But the beauty of that is if things start going sideways, you just get up and leave.
True.
You're done. Right?
That's the way I like it.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, people prefer it that way rather than having it at their house. So you do have options, and I think that it's very difficult if you grew up in, if you're the adult child of an alcoholic, or if you came from a family where there was domestic violence in the home, whatever the particular situation may be, a lot of times we can end up made to feel like we have to fix everything. We have to make it okay for everyone else. And that can spin off into being a martyr.
Okay.
And the thing is, always the most important thing to remember about martyrs is they die. Right? So that's not the outcome we're shooting for here.
True.
You are just as valuable as any other member of your family. And if you are your parent or your partner's primary care partner, I'd say you have a very good argument for why you're more important than any other person in your family, right?
True.
So you have to take care of yourself. If you are not taking care of yourself, if you get sick, if you are, just trying to get the heck out of a room quickly enough, right, and trip and, break your leg, all kinds of things can happen. Unexpected things can happen. Just think through, if something happens to you that you're not able to take care of your loved one, who is going to do that then? Right?
It's true. Christy, you're kind of touching on it, but in your article you originally wrote for 60andMe, it was entitled Managing Family Conflict and Dementia. You talk about setting boundaries. And again, you've kind of touched on setting boundaries so far in the episode, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean about setting boundaries and how a care partner can do that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that when we hear the word boundaries, especially, and I think this is changing, and I'm not trying to make this a political conversation, but a lot of times women have been in a situation where when they use the word boundaries, they're made to feel like they're being uncooperative and difficult. And a different way to think about boundaries is to instead think of boundaries as a container. Okay. So it's a container where you keep yourself and you are surrounded by boundaries. And so it's a nice, safe space for you. And everybody in your orbit needs to also have their little container, right, where they put themselves. And so containers can sit next to each other, and that's okay, but they shouldn't be crashing into each other. So if we think about boundaries more like that, that can be really helpful. Boundaries are just very useful for helping us. And again, I go back to behavioral rehearsal on this. What do we feel comfortable with? What feels okay for us? What works for us? And certainly if you're hosting a family meal, it needs to be what works for you. So if it works for you to make it a potluck, then it's a potluck, and that's the drill. And people who don't show up with food shouldn't be expecting to, freeload, right? Or however it goes. But you can just say very firmly and assertively, this is how it's going to go. And then I go back to the email on that and setting those expectations for how it's going to be. That is setting a boundary. When you send an email saying this is how it's going to be, you're laying out boundaries.
Okay. That makes sense.
That's just starting right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you are caring for yourself enough to go through some behavioral rehearsal by way of practicing the scripts in there, you're setting boundaries for yourself, right?
Okay.
Saying, I am not going to fall into the trap again. I'm not going to fall into this pattern that I feel like I've been sucked into my whole life. I'm going to give myself some other options.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean you're going to do everything perfectly? No. Sorry. It doesn't mean that's going to happen, but you're giving yourself some more options and some more choices. And it's perfectly okay, too, to say, I can see that this is becoming too much for Mom, so I think it's time for us to wrap this up. And then you do what we call visual cueing. So you start slapping leftovers on a paper plate with foil on it and handing it to people as you hand them their coats. Visual cues are great.
Right.
But there are a variety of ways that you can handle this, but boundaries are so important. And if you don't take the time to think about what feels good for you, what feels like a good container for where you are, then it's harder to put them in place later.
Right.
On the spot as things are happening. So where you could lay out boundaries and maybe avoid some weird situations, or at least know what you're going to do to handle them, if you're trying to deal with stuff on the spot, it can just get really messy really quick.
And at this point of a person's life, because most of us are older adults that have probably had several of these family interactions over the years, you can hopefully kind of anticipate what the different personalities are going to bring to this event.
Right.
And you, whether you've thought it through or not, when you think of your idiot brother or your crazy aunt or whatever, there's images of what they've probably done in the past that has caused you to label that, right? So you can anticipate and hopefully set some of these boundaries. But where I'm going with this is you have another great article I really like a lot. It's called "Is Your Tribe Serving You?" And you talk about some of these different personalities and what the true underlying personality trait, or I'm not sure what the word is I want to use there, it really truly is.
Right, where people are coming from.
Right.
Like we see them one way, but what's really going on may be very different. And that's a good connection. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. That is that in the? I'm trying to think. Is that in successfully navigating the holidays? I'm not sure, but that's
your guide references the article. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe as we wrap up today, we've got about 10 minutes left, but if you wouldn't mind maybe talking about some of those different personalities that we've talked about there.
The ones that stands out to me the most, and I think really it connects well with what we're talking about as far as family dynamics being a little bit challenging, shall we say, is in this, which is your tribe, and are they serving you? I talk about the la-la-lars. Okay. And that's like when little kids stick their fingers in their ears and going la 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 la, I can't hear you. And what's happening there is they're just saying, hey, this is no big deal. I got this. Everything's fine. No, you think Mom has a problem. Mom is totally fine. I don't know why you're such a nervous Nelly. I don't know why you always have to find a problem. And so basically they're gaslighting you, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
Like everything's fine. You're the problem. No, that's not it. And so we're thinking they're just so in denial, and what an idiot. And actually what's going on is that the reality of the situation is so devastating and so painful that they can be almost paralyzed. They don't know where to turn for help. They don't know what to do. And because they're so freaked out. And so compassion is really the right way to go here. That said, if you're the primary caregiver, you may be suffering from compassion fatigue, and you may have had a difficult relationship with this person their entire life. What's important to know is you're not going to magically change their coping mechanism, right? And this is pretty much their coping mechanism.
Right.
So if you're not able to be compassionate with them and to have a good interaction with them, there may be somebody else in the family who can serve as a good bridge between them. Maybe you'll just happen to send them this link to this article so they can see for themselves and say, wow, I thought this was pretty interesting. Don't say anything catty at the beginning, but hey, I never thought about it in this way before. And here's this article. So maybe they'll see themselves too.
And of course, I'll provide a link in the show notes to the article.
Oh, great. Thank you. That is pretty closely related to the Hollywood tribe, where these are the people that, I used to want to smack because they say things like, oh, she's just making it up. She's just pretending. She's just doing that to get attention. Like, what? No, people do not pretend to have dementia, right? There are a lot easier ways to get attention. But, this, I think, really plays into what we're talking about, difficult family dynamics and everybody being in the same room at a holiday is usually what's really going on here is we are talking about an adult child who has been abused. And it could be through, maybe they're the adult child of an alcoholic, or there's been some other type of substance abuse or domestic violence in the home. The parent typically has been narcissistic, controlling, manipulative, abusive, some type of awful parenting history, right?
Okay.
And so this adult child is usually one who has been through therapy and has seen great benefit and said, okay, I got this. They may or may not still have a relationship with their parent, but now if their parent is living with dementia, they've been sucked back in. So maybe they haven't had a relationship for 15, 20, 25 years, and now it's like they're the one holding the bag. And so we can't expect that they're magically going to have a great relationship. And even if they went to therapy and they forgave someone and whatever, like I was saying earlier, all of this stuff bubbles back up to the surface and people don't expect that that's going to happen. And they're shocked when it does. And so again, for those of us who are standing outside the circle, our job is really to support this person and to be very compassionate. But we're going to face, as professionals, we're going to face a lot of resistance from them typically because there's a lot of anger and it's understandable, right? I always say this is one of the things that's really great about being a professional is because no matter who your parent was, before the dementia, no matter what awful things they did, when they're at the point when they are living with dementia and you come to me for help, I'm able to accept them as they are right now. And I'm not grieving for who they used to be or who they never were, but you wish they had been, or angry at them because they were so awful to you. I just say, this is a person living with dementia and I know how to handle this and I know how to manage this. And I know a lot of, tips and tricks and strategies. And so, and also as an outsider, it's so much easier for me. It's easier, for you, Mike. It's easier for all of us professionals to manage situations like this. But this type of person, the Hollywood tribe, I call it, they really need extra support because a lot of times they're really, the rest of the family or outside observers who don't know the history can be very judgmental and very cruel to them and tell them, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And I can't believe that you're being this way. And the thing is, this is really where professionals can be very helpful to a person in this Hollywood tribe is hire a professional, don't deal with it. You don't have to, you have options. And I think that's something that's very foreign feeling to somebody in that Hollywood tribe, the fact that they actually do have options,
right?
Because they probably grew up thinking that they didn't. Their only option was escape.
I really felt like that article I think it's so valuable that you're able to help people understand where these these emotions, these actions of people are coming, these feelings of people are coming from. So I highly recommend, again, that our listeners look for that article. As we wrap up, Christy, the one thing I was thinking of that I've heard care partners say so much is that people want to help, and they'll say the stupidest things, and it's almost insult. It's insult. The care partner takes it as an insult. I don't know what question I want to ask you, but do you see that happening a lot around these family gatherings that don't occur very often?
I think so, because I think, and it's one of the things that we, for primary care partners, we need to take a step back, take a deep breath, take a step back. And that can be really tough because we're constantly on, right? We're constantly on duty. And this is a person we love and we're very protective of, and we're around them all the time. So we do have a different type of relationship with them than family who pops in from out of town every once in a while. But when I say take a step back, I mean, think about the fact that this other person in your family hasn't seen your loved one or hasn't interacted with your loved one in 6 months or a year. And they're going through a little shock process, right? As they walk into this situation and are seeing, and even if you sent them the email and laid out for them, there's still a part of their brain saying that can't be true, right? They're a la la la, right. La 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 la, can't be true. It is true. So they're in shock right there. And people, in that situation, a lot of times they blurt out something that's in the top 10 of stupid, which is, why didn't you tell me sooner?
Right.
And your immediate reaction typically is to start screaming, I did! You wouldn't listen! Yep. Which again is a very normal reaction. We go right back to behavioral rehearsal, right? Okay. To stay out of things like this. But so people will say dumb things, or they'll say, I didn't know it was this bad. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know it was this bad. Why don't you ask for help? Things like that. And so I would really advise just take a deep breath and just think for a sec before you say something. And what comes out of your mouth may be something like, I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure. There's a lot going on here right now. Can we talk about this as soon as I get so-and-so settled, or as soon as I get the dishwasher loaded, or as soon, throw something else in there. Can you give me a minute to process that? I'm a little bit distracted right now. Give yourself some time. That's okay.
Right.
Because otherwise you may end up in a situation where you say something you regret. It may feel great at the time, but you may come back later to ultimately regret it. And then for me, my personal line is when somebody says something stupid to a person living with dementia.
Oh, right. And
my personal line is, I just won't have it. So I'll immediately correct, and I really don't care if your feelings are hurt. And that's me, right? Everybody has their own style, but, I have personally witnessed where, not in my own family, but in other people's families, where somebody said, God, don't you remember? I just told you that, Mom. And I've immediately popped back with, absolutely, she does not remember. That's why she asked you.
True. That's true.
And I have one of those faces that's the opposite of a poker face. So often I don't even need to say words. Just by making eye contact with someone, they understand that they wandered down a path they shouldn't be on. And so we can do that differently. Of course, my reaction back always depends on kind of what the energy was coming with the comment. Sometimes people just don't know any better. That's a great opportunity to say, I bet you didn't get this when you said it, but one way that I found that works really well is, and then, tell them the way that it works really well, right? The way that it works better. But again, your number one job is always safety as that primary care partner. So if somebody is verbally attacking your parent or partner, game over. They're out. They don't need to be in your house anymore. Whether they leave with leftovers or not, it's just like, and we're done.
Enforce that boundary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You have a lot of great information. I think we could probably talk on this topic for a couple hours because it's such a
Right.
it's such a difficult topic, even when dementia's not in the family. That these family gatherings bring out the best and the worst in people, unfortunately. To our listeners, be sure to check the show notes out because I will be putting links in there to other resources that Christy has, and because I know one of the articles Christy has some ways you can just change subtly the words you use, and it just changes everything. So I want to thank you again, Christy, for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners. If you have any questions,
Yes, thank you.
If you have any questions about this topic or any other, feel free to reach out to Christy or myself. But that does conclude this conversation on family dynamics in the holidays with Christy Turner to the Dementia Sherpa. And I just want to say I hope everybody does have a great holiday season with your loved one and yourself and your extended family. So thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to The Alzheimer's Podcast with Mike Good of Togetherness. For more information and to get the resources mentioned in this episode, visit togetherness.com/podcast.